The Fifth Amendment's takings clause seems pretty straightforward. If the city needs your house to expand the road in front of it, the city can seize your property by eminent domain, but they must pay you just compensation for it. That's the easy part. But what if, instead of taking your land, the law prohibits you from using it or from profiting from it? The United States Supreme Court considered that issue almost a century ago in Pennsylvania Coal Company versus Mahon. Pennsylvania Coal Company owned a parcel of land rich in subsurface coal. In 1878, Pennsylvania Coal deeded the surface rights to Mahon, but retained the right to mine the coal beneath the surface. The deed clearly stated that Mahon accepted the surface rights subject to any risks associated with the company's coal mining. Even if the company's mining operations damaged Mahon's property, Mahon waived all claims for the resulting damages. Despite the risk, Mahon built a house on the land. But in 1921, the state of Pennsylvania passed the Kohler Act, which prohibited coal mining that might threaten any residential structure above the mine. Since Pennsylvania Coal's mining on the parcel would put Mahon's house at risk, the act effectively prohibited the company from removing any coal from the ground. Mahon sued the company in the Court of Common Pleas, arguing that the Kohler Act entitled him to an injunction preventing the company from mining under his home. The Court of Common Pleas agreed that the act prohibited the company from mining on the parcel, but denied Mahon his injunction. The court held that applying the act to Pennsylvania Coal would be unconstitutional. On appeal, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court agreed that the company's property rights were constitutionally protected, but ruled that the act was nevertheless a legitimate exercise of the state's police power and ordered that the injunction be issued. The United States Supreme Court accepted the case to consider whether the Kohler Act's prohibition on the company's mining of its coal was constitutionally permissible. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., writing for the court, held that while a property may be regulated to a certain extent, a regulation that goes too far will constitute a taking and require just compensation. But Holmes didn't articulate a precise definition of how far was too far. Holmes first noted that governing would be impossible if every incidental reduction in property value caused by changes in general laws required compensation. Instead, judges should consider the extent of that value reduction. At some point, the diminution in value becomes so great that it requires an exercise of eminent domain, and thus the payment of just compensation. Holmes distinguished this situation from an earlier decision upholding legislation requiring mine owners to leave unmined pillars of coal to support mine tunnels. By requiring all mine owners to leave pillars, thus improving the safety of all miners, the law secured what Holmes called a, quote, average reciprocity of advantage, unquote, to all persons covered by the law. That justified its enforcement against a challenge under the takings clause. The court held that the Kohler Act wasn't a valid exercise of the state's police power. The act left coal companies with no commercially feasible way to mine coal below residences. If the state determined that public safety warranted the protection of all subsurface coal below residential structures, then the state would have to exercise eminent domain and compensate the owners for the coal. The court reversed the decision of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Justice Louis Brandeis dissented, arguing that an owner's right to use his land isn't absolute. The state can prohibit a landowner from using land in a way that creates a public nuisance or endangers others. The Kohler Act was a legitimate use of the state's police power to prevent injury or damage to the general public. Moreover, the state didn't actually take the company's coal. Therefore, Brandeis concluded, no Fifth Amendment taking had occurred. Before Mahon, the court had uniformly held that laws regulating property use didn't constitute a Fifth Amendment taking, even if the law deprived an owner of any profitable use. But in Mahon, the court for the first time opened the door to what would later be called a regulatory taking. That concept would evolve during the rest of the 20th century and into the next one.